Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Elevate.Strategy Leadership Live. LinkedIn, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Now it's 5:30 for us in Toronto, Canada, for those of you who are not here in Canada. Today, once again, we have a very wonderful guest lineup. As usual, a very accomplished, successful business leader. And I'll introduce him in a second, but just a very quick update now about Elevate.Strategy. This week, we had an amazing placement for one of my key clients that I've been working with for quite a while in the US. And so I'm extremely happy for him. He was looking to join a C-suite position, and he was successful in that. So we really worked a lot on developing his story and what his career centers around as far as passion and impact. So you'll hear that a lot in my broadcast around the importance of value proposition. And on that note, one of the reasons that we have this particular series is because we found that essentially out in LinkedIn, there's a lot of tutorial videos by many of my colleagues, many very well qualified coaches on how to write LinkedIn, how to write resumes and CVs and do interviews, but not very many series on highlighting business leaders' stories and their careers. So that's one of the reasons why we have this Leadership Live broadcast. First of all, you're gonna have to excuse me a little bit because it is 5:30 and the sun is just right outside. So I'm gonna look a little bit shadowed here, but that's okay. So I want to introduce our guest now. So today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Bill Hunter with us. And Dr. Hunter, I met him quite a number of years ago through an engagement that we had together. And ever since then, I've been following his progress along in his career journey and the multiple companies that he's developed and grown and founded as well. So Bill is a healthcare leader with over 20 years experience as a public company CEO in both medical device and specialty pharmaceutical companies. He is an inventor with over 200 patents and patent applications involved in the discovery and development of groundbreaking inventions, such as the Drug-Eluting Coronary Stents and barbed wound closure device, used in over 40 million people, parents, and recorded in revenue over $25 billion worldwide. Bill has spent his career examining ways to make medical devices smarter and more effective through the use of technologies borrowed from outside the industry, such as pharmaceutical coatings, surface modification, and sensor technologies. His latest venture, Canary Medical, utilizes implanted sensor technology to allow implanted medical devices to self-report on function, activity, wear, complications, and patient outcomes. So without further ado, I'll bring Bill to the forefront here. And welcome, Bill. Thank you so much for joining our show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and as I was just mentioning before, we first, I think, crossed paths. You may not remember, but about 20 odd years ago now, and I was in a consulting firm, and you had founded your own company, and we had visit you a couple of times. So back then I was looking at you as a creator and founder with great admiration, and your technology back then was amazing. And ever since, I remember that engagement quite vividly because it was a really cutting edge biotechnology time. So Bill, why don't you tell, for those of you who haven't followed your career, don't know much about your background, if you could kind of walk us through what is it of nature of your profession right now? What do you do right now?
Yeah, so I'm a doc by training, so I think I will always think like that. And truly more by accident than by design. When I was in medical school, I'd gone to graduate school before I went to medical school, and one of the things I had been working on just turned out to be commercial. I'd been working on how to prevent medical devices from, scarring. And that somehow turned into the drug-coated stent, which became the paclitaxel stent and became the drug-eluting balloons and right. All of that. And that was Angiotech where we met. And so that got me started on a career in terms of working on medical devices and trying to make them work better. It was certainly not by design. I had always planned to be a physician. That's all I ever really wanted to be. And one day I woke up and my company had gone from a few people to a few thousand people, and thus right. ended my medical career. So that was really what got it all started.
Yeah, I don't think a couple of people to 1,000 people was an overnight thing. So I'm sure there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in there. Tell us a little bit about that journey from, going from a traditional academic route to something like a founder, right? Because a lot of people come from a professional background that's pretty steady, right? Tell me about that journey. What kind of prompted that, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was really interesting, actually. I mean, there were three founders of Angiotech. One was an interventional radiologist named Lindsay McCann. The other was an academic named Larry Arsenault, and the third was a medical student of no specific background who happened to be being me. And like every other founding group, we assumed that we could do the job really cheaply and really quickly, and we couldn't have been more wrong. I think we thought we could do it in 2 years, and it would cost $5 million, and I think it took us close to a decade and cost $250 million to actually build that stent. But nothing was the way I expected it to be. The venture capitalists got involved. I was, I guess, kind of one of the more technical people behind it. Parts of it have been my invention along with my co-founders. It wasn't just me, obviously. And the first thing, the professional investors did was bring in a professional management team, and as you do with a lot of founders, and that team just didn't work out. And so I went from being CEO, which was really a fake position that we all have when you start a company and there's only 3 people in the room and somebody, takes the role. And I was the only one without a full-time job. So I was CEO. And then I was replaced by a real CEO, and, that didn't pan out. And I was put back in as CEO in an interim role until we could find an adult to run the business. And during that period of time, while we were looking, we ended up going public. We did a big corporate deal, and things took off. And eventually, people stopped asking me when I was going to be replaced, and I ended up holding that job for 20 odd years. Right. But none of it was by design, and everything was pretty much on the job training.
Right. And what did you find was the most difficult as far as transitioning from a physician mindset, right, which is very framework based problem solving, to becoming an entrepreneur? What was that mind shift? The biggest challenge behind that?
Yeah, there were probably 2 challenges. One is that all I ever really wanted to be as a kid was to be a doc, and so I really didn't want to give it up. It was something it was really important to me, and so leaving that was quite difficult. But the hardest part was that I had absolutely no training. I'm in Vancouver now, but I was an Ontario kid. I went through the schools. Yeah. I didn't even have grade 10 economics. I mean, I have absolutely no business training whatsoever. And so while I understood the technical part, and to a lesser extent, I maybe even understood the market because I was an end user. I was a clinician, so I knew what we were trying to make and why we were trying to make it. But I had absolutely no business background at all. And everything they tell you about physicians and their lack of business acumen is true. So you can imagine how ill-equipped I was. And so it really was about, trying to catch up and learn as fast as I could. Hence why I met you and our colleague Michael Rayner and others, and people I brought on board to try and teach me all the things that were missing in my career. Right.
Yeah. I can only imagine what it's like to sort of give up on a childhood dream to start something it's almost like an accidental tourist, right? You kind of end up one day and you look around you and, but it's always been aligned to the medicine, the medical field though as well, right? So yeah, when you come up with, and a lot of entrepreneurs or people who want to transition entrepreneur often ask the question about how do you come up with a good idea, right? When you think about sort of your journey as a serial entrepreneur, how do you come up with good ideas? Like, how do you start to begin to know where to begin?
Wow, I wish I could say something insightful. Let me try and break that down. So, the first time I did it, it was truly an accident. We were working on something. I was working on something, and I gave a lecture in the vascular department at UBC, which is where I went to graduate school and medical school. And one of the clinicians, Lindsay McCann, was listening to me talk about my scientific work. And he said, you know what, I know exactly where that could be useful. And he said, I think we can use that on a stent. And that's how we got going. And, he knew some people, we raised some money, we did it really more as a way as an academic program, quite honestly. We thought it was easier to raise money to do that. And, there was some great science there too, but there was a lot of luck there too. And it worked. And the great thing about my business is if it works, it covers up a lot of issues. If your science works, people find a way to fund it. So the first one was really a random act. Canary was really much more deliberate. At that point in time, they say there's kind of two peaks in entrepreneurialism. I mean, the first one was pretty classic for me. I was in my late 20s, and the second one I was, in my early 50s, which is kind of the second peak of that. And the second peak's really, really different because you are, you have more experience. You're more organized. You kind of know what you don't know, and importantly, the things you do know by now after you've been doing it for 25 or 30 years. And so, the second piece was like, hey, medical devices don't connect to the internet, and my car and my refrigerator connect to the internet. How is it possible that life-saving devices don't connect to the internet? And that's got to be a good idea. That's got to be something that will work. And unlike the first time around, you at least know the steps you got to take and the people you got to call and the stuff you've got to do. So that's a much more structured way to go through it. The first time really is kind of a trial and error exercise, I think.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine that a lot of folks will look around at the situation and see what's there an unmet need for, and maybe start from there and say, hey, maybe there's an idea that's a good one there. And fortunate enough, it sounds like co-founders are such an important part of entrepreneurialism, right? And I just kind of want to stop there a little bit, just park on the entrepreneurship of things, because we don't often get a whole lot of real, genuine entrepreneurs on my show, at least not yet. Mm-hmm. And you're actually one of the first. So tell me a little bit about the importance of the partnership aspect of working with co-founders and kind of where they come along and play along. And is it possible to do this by yourself?
I only know one industry. I only know healthcare, and our business, and probably everyone would say this about their business to a certain extent. Our business is pretty complicated. It's highly regulated. That goes without saying. But how we manufacture things, how we submit to the regulatory bodies, there are a lot of areas of expertise. Right. How we build these things, how we sell and market them, and what we do. It's a very complicated business, and in many ways that's intimidating, but in other ways it's kind of liberating. And by that I mean you quickly realize you really have no hope of knowing everything that you need to know to make it all work. And so that really encourages you to bring in people from all kinds of other disciplines that have the knowledge base that you don't have. And so in my first company, it was really kind of a collection of us just getting together and not really knowing, but, feeling we were onto something. In, this company, which is kind of my third, but it was much more deliberate. It was like, okay, here's the 5-6 things that I clearly don't know, and let's go out and get 5 or 6 people who really fill it. So the first one was an accident of circumstance. The second one was really a deliberate attempt to bring together a group with the right skill set to make the vision happen.
Right. You'd mentioned earlier about the journey from thinking that it would only take a couple of weeks and maybe a couple of tens of grands to now over 10 years or however many years, but it was $250,000. I remember you saying that.
Billion.
$250,000, right? You said?
No, yeah, we thought we could do it for $250,000. It ended up being $250 million, but yes.
$250 million. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a bigger question now. So what was that like? I mean, that's not chump change, right? So tell me about that journey from where you had the inception, a great idea, to, kind of maybe skyrocketing, right? Reaching the peak and then figuring out,
Yep.
hey, listen, there's something else that needs to be done.
Yep. Yep.
What's that journey like? Tell me about that.
I don't want to keep ping-ponging back and forth, but the first time through, it really is, it's a journey of discovery. Like, you just don't know what you don't know, right? So you raise $5 million and it starts to run out, and then you raise 10, and then you raise 20, and then you just keep going. And if your science works, it gets funded, and if your science doesn't work, it's time to go back to practicing medicine. And that's kind of how it goes. And I think it really is trial by fire. When it's a more deliberate exercise, like Canary has been for me, you approach it quite differently. You sit down and on the very first day, you say, okay, where's the $100 million going to come from? Because you know that that's what it's going to take, and you truly do sit down and come up with a plan to go from seed money, or friends and family, to seed, to venture capital, to so on and so forth. Because you realize that $15 or $20 million is only going to get you halfway to somewhere, and so it's a much more organized and deliberate process. And a much more realistic one, because it's going to take a fair bit of time, and that it's going to be expensive, and there's going to be slip-ups along the way.
Right. And how do you get people on board to have the same confidence in that product as you do, right? Because a lot of times what I've seen is really just persuading people with your vision, right? And it's not their vision, but they've got to catch it on. So how does that process work for you?
Yeah, I think skin in the game really, really matters, and it comes in different forms, right? When I started Angiotech, I was a med student, and I left a really good residency to focus full time on the business. And so, although I wasn't writing checks, it wasn't my money. I didn't have money to invest in the company, quite honestly. I was a kid. But I had invested my career, and I'd taken a very significant step in order to do that that showed the venture capitalists that I was committed, and that I was all in. And that I've heard in years since that was a really important part of why they put money in. The next time around, most of the seed money came from my founders. We put the money in. We did the first experiments on our own nickel. Our first company had been good to us, so we were able to do that kind of thing. And so by the time we went to the VCs, we had not only done a lot of work, but we had, we hadn't just given ourselves shares. We had paid for it, and had used our own money to get to where we were. So whatever you do, if you want credibility from a capital raise point of view, I think you've got to put yourself on the line. And maybe that's your career. Maybe that's making a life decision to do it. Or maybe that's putting your own money at risk, but you've got to show people that you can't expect people to be committed in you if you're not committed in what you do.
Right. What was the most difficult? And I'm fast forwarding now to what I was going to ask you later, because it makes sense here. But what was the most difficult struggle for you to get up that ladder and kind of, I guess, soar to the top, right, as an entrepreneur, and then having to ride the waves? What was the biggest struggle that you had to face and overcome?
Yeah, it's funny. I think what happens is that you kind of drink your own Kool-Aid, and so you're pretty sure that this has got to be right, and the first thing that happens when you go out and tell people your vision is everybody tells you what's wrong with it, and they kind of smile and look at you and say, well, the reason that you don't know enough to know why you're going to fail, and there's 1,000 reasons to fail, and so really the first part of your journey is actually sitting down and coming up with counter reasons as to how you're going to avoid all the types of failure that everybody tells you you're destined to have. And in fact, the people that you talk to are right, which is also hard, right? Your immediate response is, oh, you're wrong. Like, this is straightforward. This is going to work, blah, blah. And they're saying, no, here's the reasons why. And the reason I say they're right is they've talked to lots of entrepreneurs, and 99% of the time it didn't work out. So their experience actually is quite valuable. They're going to tell you the 99 reasons out of 100 why it doesn't work.
Right.
And at first, that's really, I think that really sets you back, and because you expect everybody's going to go, oh, of course, like, this just makes perfect sense. And in fact, what you find is that you spend most of your time kind of counterpunching. And for most people who are excited and motivated by what they're doing, they find that really, really difficult. And I think that's when a lot of people just stop, because they expect people to come up and tell them how great it is and get behind them, and that's actually not what happens. Just the opposite happens. Everybody tells you why you can't do it, and in fact, your second step is proving to them how you can overcome all the limitations in your business model.
Right.
So it's kind of backwards to what you think it's going to be like.
Right. And you talked about having to counterpunch. And I guess it takes a tremendous amount of humility to be able to accept people sort of poking at your baby, right? So would it be safe to say then that one of the struggles that you had was to constantly overcome sort of the pushback and think about different strategies around how do you get that story across, or how many prototypes did you have to go through, for example? Like how many rounds, how many visits did you have to go back before you finally got some progress?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually answer that question backwards in a way that I hope encourages people to persevere. So we had a lot of luck at Angiotech. I mean, our device worked really, really well, and better than we ever expected. And we probably returned the fund for most of our venture capitalists. So they probably made 1,000 times their money on the Angiotech investment, because we were able to get there fairly quickly without a lot of dilution, and it was well done. So when we were fortunate, and so when Canary came along, and I thought, wow, this is a no-brainer. This just seems like a really straightforward idea, and super excited about it. I went to a lot of people who had invested before and had done really, really well. And I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. I thought I was going to make like 5 phone calls to 5 people who'd had a really good experience, the first time around. And that, the money would just flow in. And it didn't. It actually was really hard to fund.
Okay.
And, I couldn't just do it on reputation, or I couldn't do it on friendships, or past history, or whatever. I thought, great, I'll just go raise the seed money. We'll go do this. We got a plan, blah, blah. It was a little bit of the trust me business plan. I mean, probably my own hubris, I guess, thinking that it was going to be easy. And it wasn't. It was just as hard as it was the first time. I had to go back and build it all out. I had to have answers to every question. I had to put my own money in. We had to do our own advances to get there. And so, my statement would be, it doesn't matter, first time, third time, 10th time, it's probably always going to be hard, unless you're, I don't know, Elon Musk. Don't be discouraged, because it's the same for all of us, and it doesn't matter how many tours of duty you've done. Your business has got to stand that questioning, and if it doesn't, then it's not going to get funded.
Right. I'm sure Elon Musk has a biography that's probably not completely unspeckled as well as far as successes, but so let me ask you then, from that perspective, how do you know when to say stop, right? How do you know when to say, or can you share with us, are there any experiences that you've had where you started something and then you stopped, and for what reason did that happen, or if not, then when should someone stop if they're trying to build something?
Yeah. And probably there are times I should have stopped and didn't, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's one of the great things, I guess, about being in healthcare is it really should keep you humble, because you do fail way more than you succeed.
Right.
Biology is a very objective evaluator. You can have what you think is the greatest science in the world, and everything makes perfect sense, and you go into a clinical trial and it just doesn't work. Certainly having sat on the boards of companies and run companies where either there was an FDA issue or a clinical trial didn't turn out the way that you want it to do, we've had to wind things up. And I think if you get to the point where you're really truly going to have to start again, that your basic premise has not met the test of your principal hypothesis, I think you've got to really seriously think about what you want to do. The harder part, of course, is when you have a diverse business and you have multiple products and some are working and some are not.
Right.
That becomes much more of a portfolio management issue.
Right, yeah. And I think if you grow to that level, then you have sort of a separate set of problems that you're going to have to deal with, right? Because your investors aren't necessarily going to believe in every single product that you're trying to push forward, right?
Yep.
So you were saying earlier about going back to the original hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have the science background too, so I understand that the feedback loop mechanism of when you go back and say you have a hypothesis, you've tested a million times, and it's just not true, right?
Yep.
What kind of, for someone who's not from a science background or someone who's not familiar with that test and learn approach, is there sort of a framework that you follow whereby if you do 5 times and it fails, then you kind of reduce it by 50%?
Right.
What do you do?
I mean, I'm very fortunate. I was classically trained as a scientist, and I've read a lot of business books about how it's not a bad management technique to think like a scientist, and the strength of that approach, which I think can be adopted by anyone. I don't think you have to be a scientist to do it, but whatever your business is, I think you've got to sit down and say, okay, this must be true, right? And if this is not true, then I have to rethink where I'm. And you have to be honest with yourself. And if you run the test and you run it well and you believe in the results, whatever that is, maybe that's a market introduction, maybe that's a beta testing of a product. If it doesn't turn out that your central hypothesis is correct, you really have to seriously rethink it. And I've had that happen to me at multiple points. I haven't just had that as a scientific failure. One of my favorite technologies was a technology called Quill, and I really believed in it. It was the barbed wound closure device, and it's reasonably successful now. But I fell in love with that technology. I was absolutely certain that it was going to dominate wound closure. And despite the evidence coming back from the market that it was going to be useful in certain areas and it was going to be adopted in certain areas, and that other places just weren't going to have the adoption that I thought they were going to be, I kept pushing, and I probably pushed too hard and for too long, thinking that I was right and the market was wrong.
Right.
And of course the market was right. I think that's what you've really got to do. You've got to, when things don't work out the way you plan, yes, we all hear stories that you've got to persevere, you've got to push forward, yes. Right. But when real solid data comes back that says that you're on the wrong track, you've got to internalize it and you got to think through it. You really do.
Right. And at that point, you have the decision around cutting your losses.
Or course correcting, right?
Or course correct, absolutely.
Yeah.
But course correcting, I assume, also feels kind of bad as well, because you've been putting your heart and soul into a hypothesis and you're wrong, right? And I'm sure as a physician who's trained in medical sciences, you can't be wrong. You can't afford to be wrong, right? So I have great admiration for biotech entrepreneurs, because so much is at stake, right? You've got, tell me about the process, just generally speaking, like FDA approvals, how many stages do you have to go through to get something like what you're doing approved?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that defies a simple answer, because every product has its own unique pathway. But when I'm invited to join a board, or somebody asks me, who's starting a business, I already said the one thing, which is, where's the 100 million going to come from? Everybody tells me, no, Bill, you've got it wrong. It's only going to cost 15 million. It's going to take 3 years. And I'm like, yeah, I understand, but where's the 100 million going to come from?
Yeah.
And I'm not being facetious, but and you double the timeline, right? Because you're not always wrong, but you're often partially wrong. So you go forward and you've got results, and those results point you in a direction, but it may not be the linear path. It may be the winding path that you're going to be on, and all of our stuff takes longer and costs more to get there because there's so many unknowns. And I think that flexibility and that nimbleness is really important in this particular business. But I'm sure in your life as a consultant, you've seen it in many businesses. So those are important characteristics.
Yeah, most definitely. I think one of the challenges for any kind of problem solving is in itself defining the problem first, right? And if there's no sort of observable need for a specific area of invention, no matter how right you are, it's still going to be maybe a flop, right? So part of it is kind of convincing that there is a need for this and then showing the data that it's true. I wonder whether it's harder for a medical device company to prove that because of the length of time and the duration of maybe the trials that you have to go through, right? So, okay, let me shift a little bit over to you personally. So you talked about Bill as a business person and kind of having to push back on folks who don't believe in you and funding and all that. Maybe getting a little bit more personal. For you as a human being, tell me about, maybe share with whatever you can about some of the personal struggles that you've had to kind of overcome as far as, becoming successful as you are right now.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a 9-to-5 job. I'd say there's kind of two aspects to it that are difficult. One is that it defies kind of conventional calendars, right? I mean, when you're the little guy, when you're just starting out, and if I want to pitch my idea to Medtronic or Boston Scientific, and they say the only time they're available is Tuesday, the 23rd at 2:00 in Minneapolis, then guess where I'm going to be on Tuesday, the 23rd, at 2:00. So, you really do get pulled around a lot, and it's difficult for yourself. It's difficult for your family. It's difficult for the people who love you because, you spend a lot of time on the road and you don't really have the same control, right? I mean, you don't, if I was the CEO of Boston Scientific, I could tell people when to come and meet with me. But if I want to meet with the CEO of Boston Scientific, I'm going to have to go when he or she is ready to see me. And that's the problem. It's not a scheduled life. It's hard not to take it home. You're really fun to be around when things are working because you're excited all the time. Sure. And you're not a lot of fun to be around when you're having a hard time raising money and you're wondering what you're going to do when the cash balance hits zero. So, as one very important person in my life always said, I need to remember that I take everybody with me. So when I make how I am, I drag my family, I drag everybody along with me on the way, and you need to be cognizant of that because it does become more of a life than it becomes a job, unfortunately.
Right. So the personal struggle that you've highlighted there is, I guess it's a common thing among anybody who's working, which is the work-life balance. It's not taking work home with you. But for an entrepreneur, because your back is against the wall, right? You've got no salary coming in, and really it's all about the revenue that you generate. You kind of, hunt and gather and eat them, right? Yep. So emotionally speaking, how do you maintain that balance for yourself?
Yeah, the hardest part I always found in this job, I think I always believed that some way or another I'd land on my feet. So it was never really the personal part.
Right.
What I always found really difficult is, and you go out, you recruit somebody, they leave their job, they sell their house, they move to, the new location, they take that position, and you wake up and you've got, a lot of employees, and those people have believed in you to, that everything's going to be okay. And in small companies, sometimes things are okay and some things aren't. Sometimes they're not okay. Right. And I think the most stress I ever feel is when things aren't going well. And you do take it very personally, and you do feel personally responsible for the people that you have brought on board. You were supposed to take care of them. You were supposed to make sure that they got paid on the 15th and the 30th.
Right.
And when that doesn't happen, and you've got to downsize, or you've got to course correct, or you've got to change and eliminate programs, that's really, really tough. That's the part that I've always found hardest to deal with.
Right. The responsibility for your staff and the workers that have put their trust in you, right?
Yep.
So when you've had to do that a number of times, I guess, how do you prepare for that mentally? I guess the question is, are you already starting off a company or an organization knowing that there's a risk there that's going to happen, and so that kind of makes you more cautious? Or one of the challenges that I've always seen people face is when to scale, right? Knowing when it is that's the right time to hire up and to kind of balance beam that thing, right? So
yep.
How do you make sure that you kind of be a good manager, the best that you can be?
Yeah. So, first time around, I think you get seduced by things when they're going well, and you hire and you grow, and, it's just, you think that the more employees you have, or the more that, the more successful you are. And I think everybody makes that mistake. I see that a lot.
Yeah.
For first time entrepreneurs, failure is hard to manage. Success is equally hard to manage, by the way. And so you just don't know, and then you have to downsize, and then you have to lay people off, and then you see the errors of your ways, right? You feel what you did to other people as a result of your mismanagement. And so next time through, you're I hope a little wiser. You use more consultants. You hedge. You outsource stuff. If I'm only going to do a very particular project, with a very particular expertise, that's something I may go to a contract research organization now to do. Whereas 20 years ago, I might have hired 5 people, and then when we finished the product, I would have been like, oh, now what do I do with them? I don't do that anymore.
Right.
I only hire in the specs and places where I believe those people are going to be with us potentially for as long as we can keep going.
Right.
So, you do start to adapt. If you have any kind of conscience, having to downsize your company is something that leaves a mark.
Right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pick up on what you said earlier around success is is difficult to manage.
Yep.
as is failure. What did you mean by that?
So at Angiotech, our first product, the Texas coronary stent, at the time it came out, was the greatest selling medical product in history. And it was the biggest commercial launch. It was bigger than Viagra. It was bigger than Lipitor. It was hard to actually quantify. And what happens with a lot of companies is that your entire life is focused on this one event, right? And we were like that was all that mattered, was getting that stent out the door, and then it's out the door, and you look at yourself and you say, well, okay, now what? Right? And worse, if you're a public company, all the Wall Street analysts ask you, now what? Because they've already priced in the value of that product, and they want to know what's coming next. Where's the growth going to come from? Now that you've done that, and catching lightning in a bottle twice is not a viable business strategy, and so having a follow-on is really, really difficult. And I think it's really hard to train yourself, because everybody tells you you've got to be singularly focused. You've got to have this one thing, you've got to get this one thing done. And that's probably true if you're going to sell it when you're finished, then that's okay.
Right.
But if you think of that being a sustainable business, you've got to be working on, the second child before the first child leaves home. And that's a really hard thing to do. And it goes against every instinct you have. And in fact, if you're a public company, nobody's going to value the stuff in your pipeline. All they want to value is the first thing coming out there. So it's really hard to invest and spend money on number 2 and number 3 because, that's just called burn rate, and people complain about that a lot. And they complain about that until the day you launch, and then they say, what else do you have, right? So
I told you so. Yeah, we all believe in you from the start, and
exactly.
We're your best friends still. Yeah,
exactly. So the discipline in terms of doing things that might be unpopular or having a follow-on it's difficult to do. And I clearly in my first company was not quick enough to diversify. I was not quick enough to have a follow-on product. And we paid the price for that mistake. At Canary, we're hopefully just about to launch our first product, but our second and third are actually fairly close behind it. We were a lot more disciplined this time about making sure that we didn't have all our eggs in one basket.
Right. So that succession planning is critical. And that's almost counterintuitive to an entrepreneur just starting out, right? Because you're just trying to get something out there that you love, hopefully have some passion for, that there's a demand for, right? No one ever prepares you for success if it actually blows up. I remember when I left the corporate environment to do coaching, executive coaching, I was still trying to barely kind of get my bearings around what market I was in. Was I a young professional or executives? And one of my mentors said to me, okay, well, you're thinking all about these potential problems. He's like, have you thought about what happens if you're going to have to scale? Or what happens if you have too much business?
Right.
And at that point, you're like, no, that's a silly thing to think about because you're just trying to succeed, right? So I guess in some sense, you're saying prepare for success as well, because that's got its own kind of ball of challenges that you have to face as well.
Yeah, we back to the taxes story. We took 70% of the world market in 70 days. And that sounds like it's a lot of fun. It's not. You should see the strain that puts on an organization, right?
Right.
Rapid success is as painful in its own way as rapid failure. People are not happy with you when you don't deliver the thing that they really want as well.
Yeah, sure.
And so, the failure, everybody writes about failure, and they should. It's we all want to avoid it at all costs. But when you think you might be successful, a lot of people are a little bit slow in preparing for that as well, right?
Right. So. Gotcha. I want to talk a little bit about your perpetual desire to be an entrepreneur. And have you ever thought about you in the introduction that I gave to you? There was a CEO element of these larger companies. Yep. What was your stint there? Because I'm not clear between Angiotech and Canary. What happened there? Can you just walk us through? What's that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Two kind of stories. I mean, when everything was going well at Angiotech, I was recruited on a couple of occasions to go run big medtech companies. I mean, Angiotech was a decent size. We had a couple of thousand employees. We had 8 manufacturing plants around the world, but we weren't the size of the really bigs.
Right.
And so I probably was in my 40s, early 40s, and so I was kind of on the way up and kind of had some experience, but and I went and I interviewed with some of the big companies for to take a more traditional career path. And as I went through it, I realized that my personality was just not suited for it. I didn't have the ability to get consensus of 33 vice presidents to move forward with a decision. It's just I always say medtech is for entrepreneurs with ADD, right? Because it's quicker than the pharmaceutical side. So,
right.
It was not the right thing for me. And I remember in one interview for a CEO job, I said, I just don't think I can be institutionalized. And that was when I realized that maybe I'm not cut out to go do the big company thing. And the second life experience was in between the two companies I started. I came off the board at a company called Cardiome, and I was, in between jobs, and which is a kind way of saying I'd just been fired from Angiotech. And which is another interesting experience is getting fired from a company you start.
Yeah, but, I always wondered about that. I was going to ask you that.
But in any event, yeah, I was on the board, and I came on board for what I thought was going to be kind of a 1-year tour while we got things going, and it was not meant to be a longer term thing. I ended up being there for about 8 years, and anyways, that was the only time I've ever been hired to do something. Okay. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't my passion. It wasn't my thing. I was kind of hired to do a job, and I was doing a job that had already been created, which I also am probably not emotionally well suited for. So a lot of it is just kind of learning yourself, and this last one, the Canary thing, has been a ton of fun. Mm-hmm. Because you're old enough to know yourself. You're old enough to at least have an idea of what you've got to do. You have the ability to go and find the people that you really, really thought were super smart and ask them if they want to join you. It's a little bit more of a, it's a little bit more on purpose.
Right. Sure.
And so, you do learn a lot along the way. And you had a list of questions for me, and one of the questions was, what advice would you give? And the piece I would give on that is just, don't think you know it all, and don't look around corners, right? I mean,
right.
Part of life should be a bit of a random walk, and you should learn about yourself along the way, and that may guide your career choices. And just because, when you were 8 years old, all you thought you were ever going to be was be a doctor and be a surgeon, doesn't necessarily mean that's how life is going to turn out, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Something you just raised. Oh, so you brought it up, not me. Tell me what it's like to be fired from your own company. I've never wrapped my mind around that, but I can only surmise that it's not a pleasant experience.
Well, first off, I deserved it, right? I mean, we hadn't come up with the follow-on offering as quickly as we should have, and the stock had gone way down, and right. The shareholders had lost a lot of money, and so. Not that I thought I deserved it at the time, but 12 years later, for sure, I deserved it. But it's really weird. I mean, you go into a building that you built, and a board member's sitting at your desk, and they got a piece of paper for you to sign. It's that's a life-changing event. When you get escorted out of a building that you built, but. I probably learned more from that than almost anything else in my life. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, I still can't wrap my mind, but I mean, I'll never, because I don't have the success that you had there. But I guess that's just how serious it is that the street and the board takes around having succession plans, right? As far as that, if you were to look back now and say to yourself, however many years now, besides saying that you need to have a succession plan, what's the mentality that you would say to yourself? Like, for example, you had said, it's difficult to manage conquering 70% in 70 days, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say to yourself as far as, hey, have this mental mindset in check, because otherwise it's going to get the better of you? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, I think all the things your parents told you, and which is that failure is a really good teacher.
Yeah.
And if you kind of embrace that and try and learn from that, it does a number of things. It makes you appreciate success when it appears, and that's breathtakingly infrequent. So hopefully you really do smell the roses when it comes around. But it also keeps you from getting too far ahead of yourself and being a little bit more self-questioning. I think one of the problems of being a CEO, and one of the things, I'm just another kind of weird statistic. I'm 58 years old, and I got my first CEO job when I was 29. So I've been a CEO for now exactly half my life.
Right.
And one of the problems with it is that everybody tells you what they think you want to hear.
Right. Okay.
And what happens to you is that you start to think you're way smarter than you actually are, and you aren't self-critical enough. And I think what's really helpful is, once you have a few failures under your belt, you realize, how important it is to not, think that you have all the answers. Just because your job says you're supposed to have all the answers doesn't mean you do.
Right.
And it forces you to ask for help and to listen to others and to keep an open mind. And you do come to realize that really great ideas can come from anywhere within your organization. From your frontline sales folks to, your junior lab techs. And, once you get to that, it becomes a bit of a self-check.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. And I sense from speaking with you and your tone that, probably the way that you would have sounded 20 years ago would have been quite different than it is now. I mean, this is a very mellowed out Dr. Bill, right? So, and,
I think what if I had, if you heard my IPO roadshow from, whenever that was, because 1997, and you heard the pitch for my present company, you'd hear a lot more phrases like, I just don't know. We need to figure that out. That's a really important point. And, here's the following 5 steps we're going to have to do in order to address that question or to get that answer. And it far fewer absolutes and far more, respecting the fact that the answer to the question isn't always known. I think when you're younger and somebody asks you a question, you talked about the medical training, you're expected to give an answer.
right.
Patients really don't like it when you say, I don't know. So I think part of the problem with medical training is that they, you have an answer for every question. Even if it's not a good answer, you're supposed to have an answer for every question. I think in business, it's actually healthy to say, I don't have an answer for that question.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And in fact, my graduate supervisor had a phrase that I've tried to embrace for my entire career. And he always said to me, he said, it's not the quality of the science that matters. It's the quality of the question. And what he meant was that, there's all these amazing scientific techniques out there. If you've got a great question, you'll find the people who can come up with the answer.
Right.
But the difference between pedestrian science and great science is the quality of the question. If you're asking a really great question, then you'll do something significant. If you're asking an incremental or a somewhat banal question, you will get incremental and banal answers. And I think you feel more comfortable with uncertainty, and you don't feel like you have to have the answer to everything.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. And it's that idea of having that big, bold hypothesis at the end, right? To say, I know enough now to have a pretty good hunch about what it might look like. And so you ask that tough question, and then you say, well, here's the data that I need to prove it or disprove that, right? That's kind of the key thing, as opposed to kind of saying, well, let's look at everything we have and try to make some correlation behind that and then ask the question after the fact. Yeah, I think that's, that's somewhat shaped, I think, the nature of your career and the kinds of things that you have kind of put your hands on, is that rigor of asking that right question. What do you, when you have in the past gone through disappointing times, right? The lows, you've talked about the lows and the highs with being an entrepreneur. The lows can be, the success of the product probably dictates how low you can go, right? Something that you've really invested a lot of interest in and it hasn't done as well. How have you gotten through those times of struggle, difficulty? Your family doesn't get the best of you. All that
yeah. It's funny. Just the nature of my personal history. My father, believe it or not, was actually born in 1916. My mother in 1920. And so my father was in the Air Force in the Second World War. So even though I'm 58, my parents were quite old when they had me. And so I was raised by the great generation. And,
right. Okay.
And I got a lot of really great advice. But I got one piece of bad advice from my family, right? And it was this concept that effort always equals success. And I want to clarify that, because I believe that making a concerted effort is the most important thing in life.
Mm-hmm.
What I would question is equating that with success.
Right.
And what really matters actually is the effort. And so I have had situations where I did really, really great work. I know I did. I was at the point in my life where I knew it was high quality work, and I got really bad results.
Right.
And it's equally true that there were times in my life where I probably was beyond lucky in terms of getting a really great result without, me having a lot to do with it. And
Right.
so I think what you have to tell yourself is, did I do everything? Did I work really, really hard? Did I try everything I could to make this a success? The Cardiome, the company that was in between the two,
Right.
I really thought that was some of the best work I ever did. And we got in front of the FDA and the product didn't get approved. And at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do to control it. But, did I feel like we tried everything and we used every tool available to us? I really do.
Right.
But we didn't get the result. So if you are only result oriented, be prepared to be unhappy.
Right.
And you have to tell yourself that, and now if you don't put the effort in and you get a bad result, then it's on you. Right.
Right.
But if you can comfort yourself by saying, I did all I could and the results are going to be what the results are going to be, then, I think you can exist in this position and not, go to an early grave.
Right. Yeah, it's that kind of adage of, I've been trying to tell my kids that when you compete, it really isn't about competition around how well you do with others. It really is doing the very best that you can of your own ability, right? In preparation and there might be some more gifting out there better than you, but you can't control that, right? You've done your best. And so having said that, for Canary then, and no disclosure around dollar signs, but how would you define success now for that then? Like, what you're putting all the effort into there. What success look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. Early, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, somebody made me take the Proust questionnaire. Have you ever used that in your previous life?
Yeah.
And it turns out that the thing that's most gratifying to me is discovery. It's going into uncharted territories. It's doing something that hasn't been done. That seems to be the thing that brings me the greatest satisfaction. Money's great, success is great. The stuff that goes with that's great. But real, exciting stuff is going into a new area. And the premise behind Canary is really, really simple. It's again, like if my refrigerator's connected to the internet, how come my heart valve isn't, or my knee, or my hip, or my shoulder? That we could get really valuable information by doing that. But it just hasn't been done. And to me, the satisfaction, what would be gratifying for the last 9+ years we've been working on that, is seeing that come to reality. I think that will be a wonderful commercial opportunity. I really hope my shareholders do well, and I thank them for having confidence in me. Mm-hmm. But doing something that hasn't been done, that to me would be success.
Right.
And hopefully the commercial piece comes with it.
Yeah.
But you can't control the commercial piece. You can only control the taking the horse to water part.
Yeah. Well, I think the years that you've had since I met you at Angiotech have probably refined and sharpened the kind of questions that you ask too, right? So you asked, the thing was asking the right question, the sharp questions that'll give you a really great. How does one train to ask the right question then? Like if you're to mentor someone and say, is that something that's learned? Because I think that's a skill that a lot of people don't have, even if they're not entrepreneurs. Yep. It's asking the right question and trying to figure that out either in life or in career or whatever it is. How do we do that better?
I always tell people that my biggest weakness is that I'm a pathological optimist. And I make a conscious effort to surround myself with pathologic pessimists and pathologic question askers.
Okay.
Yeah? And I've got people I've worked with for 20, 30 years now. And that's how we work together, right? I always see the opportunity. They always see the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually really, really helpful.
Right.
Because if you barge through life only seeing the opportunity, you step in every single pothole. And if all you see are the potholes, then you never really get to the opportunity. And I think where teams work really well is when you mesh those different personalities together. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is we tend to hire in our own image. We tend to be attracted to the people who have the personality traits that we think we embody.
Right.
In fact, it's actually really valuable to have people who think quite differently than you. And as much as they drive you crazy from time to time, and as much as I drive them crazy from time to time,
right.
That's what you need. And it really does take a village. And getting to the right questions means that you have enough people around the table with enough diversity of opinion that you get somewhere. Hank McKinnell, who was the CEO of Pfizer, was on my board at Angiotech. And one of Hank's favorite phrases was, if the two of us have the same opinion, one of us is redundant. And I think that's really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a group of individuals around who ask questions, and you refine those questions amongst yourself. And if you have that type of culture, you increase your chances of success.
Right. And could it be that, just using the board as an example, that if two of you have the same opinions, one is redundant, but if all of you have the same opinion, then you're going to be successful. Is that right?
If all of you have the same opinion, then you're going to fail.
Gotcha. Okay. So then to summarize so my audience tends to be, a quarter young professionals,
yes.
just starting out, kind of, maybe at a business school, and about 75% are a little bit older and further along. But a lot of them have talked about kind of going out on their own, right? So, and that's a very common thing to say, maybe even during times between, in transition periods.
Yes.
Go on my own.
Yep.
In any business at all where people want to go it alone, what's the key, one or two advice? Here's what I've heard. I've heard surround yourself with good people, right? Who are going to, push the edges in different places and help you ask the right question, right? I've heard that if you realize that if you put your effort into it, it doesn't necessarily mean success, right? But effort is critical, right? But what other piece of advice would you say to someone who's trying to, become an entrepreneur themselves?
Yeah, when one of the interesting things about going through the whole process from employee number 1 to employee number 1,000 is you see the difference between, your early hires and your late hires. Mm-hmm. And when I'm hiring into a really small company, our first kind of 10 employees kind of thing, one of the things I say to them is, one of two things is going to happen here. Right? You're either going to really love this, or you're going to run screaming from the building in the next, 20 days.
Right?
And make sure that you're at the point in your life where you can do this. Right? And I spoke earlier about the academic literature, talking about, kind of the two peaks of entrepreneurialism, your dorm room at Harvard and, kind of your mid 50s on the other end. I think that's not an accident. If you're in the middle of your career and you've got 3 kids in school, and that may not be the time to do that, because you're going to be you might make some bad decisions if you're really up against it. So make sure you're at the point in your life where you can take that risk, and it's not going to destroy yourself and everyone else around you when you do it. Mm-hmm. Because you're not going to enjoy it, and the people around you aren't going to enjoy it if, you really, really need the paycheck, and you come home one day and decide that this is the time you're going to give up the paycheck. And I know there's lots of stories about people who've succeeded in doing that, but, I've seen some examples where, they don't write books about the people that doesn't work out for. So make sure you're at the point in your life where you can really dive in, you can, really enjoy it. It's going to be something that you can can really appreciate, and you know, it's going to win or lose, right? Knowing that the loss column is way higher than the win column, right? Yeah. Knowing that the loss is actually, even if it is a loss, is still going to be a really, really positive event for you in your career. Make sure you take that risk when you're able to take that risk.
Right.
You know, that's something that nobody ever tells you to do. Everybody says follow your passion, or if you got a great idea, all the stuff. You know, I got a bookshelf full of, you know, books written on that. Nobody ever says, you know what, make sure that you're at the point in your life where, you know, you can actually do that without, you know, catastrophic effects to you and the people around you. So, you know, that's, I don't know, maybe the old man in me speaking, but that's something that I think doesn't get enough airplay.
Right. I mean, to me, it sounds like don't romanticize entrepreneurship. Right. It's serious business, right? Yeah. And it can have very serious consequences. And, you know, when we watch things like, you know, Shark Tank, for example, we hear people who have like sold their house or like taken lines of credit, and you know, it's just incredible how far people will go to try to fulfill a dream that maybe they should have let go of a lot earlier, right? So, yeah, it's I really appreciate this conversation, Bill, because this is a side of, you know, we don't often hear about sort of the peaks and the valleys of an entrepreneur that's been that big, that's really seen that much success. And, you know, to see where you're going to go with Canary is very exciting, and from what I've read so far. And, you know, I wish you every success. And I hope the effort in your case equals to the equal of success for you, right? Both in sort of solving a problem, but also financially as well. So thank you so much, Bill, and wish you all the best. And I'll talk to you soon. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to put you backstage, and we'll just thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so that was incredible. As I expected, that was a really amazing interview and conversation with Bill Hunter. And you know, if you, I would really encourage you actually to read up on him if you can, and understand a little bit about history. But you know, I remember when I was involved in my capacity as a consultant with the Angiotech Life and seeing how they were doing. They were very successful. It was incredible. And I'm sure that they still are today. And, you know, if there's any sort of life lessons that have come along since then, it's really awesome to hear sort of the candid sharing that he gave. And I'm hoping that if you watching today live or after broadcast can learn anything from it, it's that, you know, there's tremendous value to persevering and hopefully succeeding in what you're doing. But at the same time, there's warning signs that really can be there, that if you surround yourself with the right people who kind of strengthen you in ways that you're not strong in, that those might be good signs that you know, maybe time to switch gears a little bit. So anyway, thank you so much again this week for joining me, and follow up next week for another wonderful guest. All right, take care, guys.